Lesson 66, compare and order fractions. So today's lesson is going to be all about looking at two or more fractions and deciding which of the fractions is larger. Okay, now sometimes that's very, very simple to do, and it's simple to do especially when you have two fractions that have the same denominator. Because if both of your fractions have the same denominator, the same bottom number, all you have to do is look at the top number and decide which of those is larger. So if I have 1/4 and 2/4, it's very easy to see that 2/4 is more than 1/4. And you can even take a look at this picture I made for you down here, right? We have 1/4, we have 2/4. If you think about those as chocolate bars, would you rather have 1/4 of a chocolate bar or 2/4? Well, if you want to have more chocolate, you'd rather have the 2/4. And sometimes it's even easy, depending on the fractions themselves. If they don't have the same denominator, sometimes it is still easy to figure out which one is larger. So if you take, for example, the fraction 1/2 and 7/8, if you just do a little bit of thinking, and that's why I have here a thinking bubble, and imagining how much chocolate it is. So we have 1/2 of a chocolate bar or 7/8 of a chocolate bar. Very simply in your head, you can imagine those amounts and very easily decide that 7/8 is more chocolate. Okay, so even though these don't have the same denominator, sometimes it's really easy to just look at your two fractions and know right away with just a little bit of an imagining of a model which one is bigger. But sometimes it's not so easy, and you can't get away with just drawing a model to figure it out. So I have here the fraction 1/3 and 2/5. We don't have the same denominator, but we also don't have such a big difference in the amounts like we did just one slide ago with 1/2 and 7/8. Okay, so you'll see here I have drawn pictures of 1/3 and 2/5, and the amounts are pretty similar. Okay, and whenever you're drawing a model, there's always a chance that you've drawn your sections maybe a little bit too big or a little bit too small, so you can't always rely on the models to be showing you the correct answer. So we have here two very similar fractions. So what we actually have to do is find a common denominator. So common denom. Okay, we have to find a common denominator, convert these fractions to know for sure which one is bigger, or if maybe they would be equal. Now, I don't think I've mentioned so far in these videos that whenever you need to find a common denominator, what you can actually always do is just take the opposite denominator and multiply that number by your fraction. So I would take the 5 from over there, put it over there, and then I would take the 3 from the other fraction and put it over here. That won't necessarily get you the lowest common denominator, but it will get you a common denominator. So that's a handy trick to just file away. You will always find a common denominator, maybe just not the lowest one. So these fractions now become 5/15 and 6/15. So now that we found a common denominator, bottom numbers are the same. Very easy to tell. You just look at the numerator, the top number. This one is the larger fraction, so 2/5 is larger than 1/3. So quite often you are going to have to check to know for sure by finding a common denominator. All right, the next thing that we need to look at are mixed numbers, because they sort of complicate things, hopefully not too much. But mixed numbers, sometimes, once again, you can look at them and know very, very easily which one is the larger number. Okay, so here I started out with a very easy example. We have 4 and 2/8 and 3 and 5/7. What you actually should always start by doing is looking at the whole number. Okay, by just looking at the whole number, if one number is larger than another, that number is automatically the larger one. Okay, 4 and 2/8 of a pizza is more pizza than 3 and 5/7 of a pizza. So you can just start out by looking at that front number. If they're different, automatically the larger one is the one that has the larger number in the front. It's also very easy to look when you have the same number. So here I have 4 whole pizzas and 4 whole pizzas, but my fraction has the same denominator. So if you find yourself looking at two mixed numbers that have the same whole number at the front, but then they also have the same denominator, you can just use what we learned with just the regular fractions and look at the one with the larger numerator. So therefore, 4 and 6/8 is more pizza than 4 and 2/8. So a couple of easier examples there. Now, I've got to get it a little more complicated here. What if you have two mixed numbers that have the same first number? So we've got 3 whole pizzas for both of them, but then our denominators are different. Well, then it's not so easy just to look and to know. So what you will have to do is once again find a common denominator. Okay, and we already did the math over here, so just imagine that you would have to do the math, and we end up with 5/15 and 6/15, meaning this is the larger mixed number. Okay, so sometimes you'll have the same whole number at the front, and then you can just take a look at the fractions themselves and find the common denominator. Oops, shouldn't have highlighted that. Meant to highlight this. And then find the common denominator with just those fractions to figure out which one is larger. Now, it gets more complicated still in this last example I have for you here, where we have an improper fraction and a mixed number. What you have to do is either change the improper into a mixed number or a mixed number into an improper fraction. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the mixed number and change it into an improper fraction. I find that a little bit easier, but you can make a choice. So remember, we take the whole number, we multiply it by the denominator. That gets us 25. 5 times 5 is 25. And then we add the numerator, so we add 3, and we end up with 28/5. So now what we can do is we can compare fraction to fraction and decide that this is the larger number. Okay, you can do it by also changing this improper fraction into a mixed number. You will end up with the same answer, so it's just a little bit of a choice for you as to how you'd like to do it. All right, so a summary. Sometimes you can tell which fraction or mixed number is larger just by looking. Okay, some of the easier examples that we looked at. In your lesson, most of them are not going to be the ones where you can just look and tell. So for your lesson, most times you're going to have to put one or more fractions into a different form. And you're going to do that by finding a common denominator, or maybe changing a mixed to an improper, or an improper to a mixed. It will depend on the situation, so you need to look at each question and kind of decide, how can I make these fractions easy for me to compare? All right, so you need to make some choices about that. Then some specific lesson instructions. Make sure that in your notebook you show your work. Don't just guess. The only one where you're allowed to look and just write down the answer is number 7. Okay, I pre-looked at your questions. Number 7 is the only one where you can just look at it and pretty much right away know which one is bigger. For the rest, you're going to have to do some changing of fractions, common denominator or mixed to improper, improper to mixed. All right, the answer key that is coming tomorrow is just going to have the symbol for numbers 1 through 11 odd on it. So make sure that you, even in all of your showing of work, you write down that symbol to show which of the two fractions is larger. And then one more thing, for numbers 13 through 17, you're not going to be comparing two fractions anymore. It will give you a list of fractions that you need to put. Oh, I didn't look. It's either greatest to least or least to greatest, so pay attention to those instructions. So what you're going to have to do is, within the 3 fractions, find a common denominator between 3, okay? And then you're going to have to figure out which one's the largest, which one's the smallest, which one is in the middle. But write your final answer using these original fractions, because that's what I'm going to be putting in the answer key. Just because some people might have a different common denominator than other people, I'm going to be putting the original fractions in the answer key. So even though you're going to have to do fraction changes, make sure your final answer, where you put them in order, is using the original fractions. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions, let me know.